The Mississippi River flood of 1927 was one of the nation's worst disasters. After several months of nearly constant heavy rain, combined with melting snow, the Mississippi River swelled to unprecedented levels, up to 80 miles wide in Vicksburg, Mississippi. In New Orleans, there was 15 inches of rain in just 18 hours, the greatest ever known there. At this time, Mississippi relied on a levee-only approach to defend against flooding, and the first levee broke on April 16th along the Illinois shore. Then, on April 21st, the levee at Mound's Landing in Mississippi gave way. Over the next few weeks, essentially the entire levee system along the river collapsed. In some places, residential areas were submerged in 30 feet of water. It wasn't until the end of the summer before the water subsided. Many saw the flood as not merely the result of an engineering mistake in levee design, but also as the product of environmental practices in the upper part of the watershed. Some of these included the deforestation of the upper Midwest, mowing prairie grasses, the industrial growth of corn and wheat, and the drainage of wetlands. Without trees, grasses, deep roots, and wetlands, the stripped soil of the watershed could not do its ancient work of absorbing and stalling water after seasons of intense snow and rain. All of the water management work was meant to be done by the towering levee system, one which had no outlets or spillways at the time. Thus, when a 4-story high levee burst, the river emptied itself upon southern land with the fierceness of Niagara Falls. A levee's only approach caused sediment to accumulate on the river bottom, forcing engineers to regularly raise the level of the levees to hold the same amount of water. The Mississippi River had literally been lifted above ground in many places. It is obvious that this strategy created the potential for increasingly severe flood damage. Engineering science, common experience, and economics all point to a strategy that combines levees with outlets and reservoirs to handle floods, and other engineering techniques like cutoffs and jetties to straighten the river and increase the river's flow, sediment capacity, and bottom scouring ability. Civil engineers like James Eads and Charles Ellet understood this strategy, but the government's military engineers relied solely on levees, even though their own data and studies contradicted this approach. The result was both costly and dangerous. Some of the costs included more than 23,000 square miles of land being submerged, hundreds of thousands of people being displaced from their homes in states from Illinois to Louisiana, and around 250 to up to 1,000 deaths. In terms of financial costs, direct property losses totaled from $250 to $500 million, while indirect losses brought that figure up to $1 billion. There were many criticisms towards authorities in the aftermath of the flooding, mostly for favoring the white population during rescue and relief operations. Since the area's economy relied so heavily on the land and crops, thousands of plantation workers, most of them African Americans, had been forced to work in deplorable conditions, shoring up the levees near Greenville, Mississippi. Then, as the waters rose, they were left stranded for days without food or drinking water, while white women and children were hauled to safety. African Americans gathered in relief camps and were also forced to participate in relief efforts while receiving inferior provisions for themselves. It was reported that at least one black man was shot, reportedly for refusing to work. This treatment helped lead to the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to cities in the North. The 1927 flood demonstrated that the government's levees-only policy for controlling the Mississippi River was inadequate. The Flood Control Act of 1928 authorized the United States Army Corps of Engineers to build levees, diversions, and spillways for flood control. It would forever change the landscape of Louisiana. While the levees prevented some flooding, scientists have found that they changed the flow of the Mississippi River with the unintended consequence of increasing flooding in succeeding decades. Channeling of waters has reduced the absorption of seasonal rains by the floodplains, increasing the speed of the current and preventing the deposit of new soils along the way. Several floods of similar magnitude have occurred in the southeast and Mississippi area since, and further damage has been caused due to failing levees. The most recent comparable flooding event that occurred in the same region was the flooding that came as a result of Hurricane Katrina. They share many similarities. A known threat was approaching, and yet all the government spending and planning completely failed. In fact, in both cases, the government turned a normal problem into a major disaster. Additionally, the African American population was hurt disproportionately in both cases. In 1927, Herbert Hoover promised aid and assistance, which failed to materialize, and in 2005, it was another Republican president that promised enormous relief aid, which failed to materialize as well. In both cases, it was individuals and organizations, both commercial and charitable, that did the real work of reconstruction. In response to the 1927 flood, most of the levees were rebuilt higher and a few more were added in. Many have re-inhabited the land that was once destroyed by the floods and choose not to worry about what would happen if disaster struck again.